Welcome to the Council of the European Union, also known as the Council of Ministers or simply as the Council, not to be confused with the European Council or the Council of Europe. Yes, it's a naming maze that confuses even seasoned EU observers. Understanding the Council is key to seeing how national governments shape EU policy. From reviewing legislation to defining foreign policy, the Council plays a vital role. However, it's not without criticism. Inefficiency, lack of transparency, and power imbalances often come up. This multi-layered institution embodies both the promise and the challenges of intergovernmental collaboration in a union as diverse as the EU. Welcome to Ciceroni. Want to support us to make more of these videos on complex aspects of the EU? You can easily do so by becoming our patron. Every euro helps us. The Council serves as the representation of the governments of EU member states and comprises 27 ministers, one from each country. While officially a single body, the Council operates in 10 different configurations based on the subject under discussion. For instance, the Environmental Council brings together all national ministers responsible for environmental policy. This structure allows the Council to address specialized topics. At the same time, critics argue it can lead to inefficiencies and inconsistent decision-making due to the large number of configurations. Some meetings even see more than one minister per country attending if the agenda overlaps with multiple national portfolios, adding a layer of complexity. To keep things fair and make them more complex, at the same time, the Council presidency rotates between countries. Each 6 months, another country holds the presidency and chairs all meetings, giving the country a strong voice in the agenda setting for that period. While fair for each member state, it has been criticized for creating discontinuity in leadership. With priorities changing every 6 months, policy is not always consistent in the longer term. To bring slightly more stability to this rotating system, the member states work together in groups of 3, called trios. Together, they make a plan for the 18-month period they chair together. The Council makes most decisions using qualified majority voting. This means that for a decision to pass, it must gain the support of 55% of member states, representing 65% of the EU's population. To make sure the larger countries cannot simply decide everything, there is a blocking rule. A blocking minority of at least 4 countries, representing 35% of the population, can stop a decision, even if it has a qualified majority. Even with this added complication to balance influence between larger and smaller member states, it is often said that it still disproportionately favors larger states due to the population requirement. Just Germany and France together almost reach the 35% of population required, while the 22 smallest countries together don't have enough people to block a proposal. So you could imagine a policy favoring the larger, more populous countries being passed without the smaller countries having any chance of opposing. And like with most things EU, there is an exception. Particularly sensitive areas like taxation or EU membership decisions are not made by qualified majority, but by unanimity. This means that if a single country is against a vote, it does not go through. This ensures that every country is on board with a decision. But as you can imagine, it does make decision-making very slow and often leads to diluted legislation because compromises need to be made. In the worst cases, a single member state can hold an important decision hostage in order to get something else they want. The Council's work is supported by the General Secretariat and the Committee of Permanent Representatives, or COREPER. The General Secretariat prepares meetings, drafts reports, and supports the Council's operations with impartial civil service, not bound to any particular country, but rather the EU as a whole. Meanwhile, COREPER is composed of ambassadors and national officials who lays the groundwork for the Council's legislative activities and interfaces with Parliament. These work for their own country, representing their governments and national interests. While this might sound like a lot of boring administrative work, COREPER are basically the power brokers who make all the big decisions happen behind the scenes. The Council shares legislative powers with the European Parliament. Any legislative proposal must be reviewed by the Council, which can approve, amend, or reject it. This shared power underscores the balance between intergovernmental and supranational elements of the EU, but it does make the process slower and more complex. This is especially problematic when urgent decisions are needed. In case of budgetary decisions, it is slightly less complicated. Officially, the Council must approve the EU's financial plan, and so must Parliament. But if they cannot agree, Parliament holds the power to cast a deciding vote, potentially overriding the Council's stance. This prevents any deadlock in case the two institutions cannot agree. So while it is formally a power of the Council, you can question how much real power it actually has when it can always be overruled. The Council decides on the European Union's common foreign and security policy, setting strategic goals and guiding principles. It adopts joint actions for specific situations, such as countering the spread of small arms, and common positions that member states must adhere to, promoting unity on key foreign policy issues. While theoretically important, the Council often lacks strong enforcement mechanisms, leaving implementation up to individual member states, which can lead to fragmented foreign policy execution. To recap, the Council of the European Union is made up of ministers from each member state and represents their governments. It operates in 10 configurations based on policy areas and is chaired by a rotating presidency that changes every 6 months. Decisions are typically made through qualified majority voting, balancing the interests of smaller and larger member states, though unanimity is required for sensitive areas like taxation. While it shares legislative and budgetary powers with the European Parliament, its role is often criticized for inefficiencies, lack of enforcement mechanisms, and fragmented execution of foreign policy. If you enjoyed this video and would like to learn more about other EU institutions, their functions, and the legislative process, check out our other videos and subscribe to our channel.